while they're simultaneously building up the US government, they're building up the Russian government, they're building up the capability militarily of both. And then what happens? Oh, well, there's a communist government over there, let's say in Guatemala with Arbenz, or in the Congo with Patrice Lumumba, or Salvador Allende in Chile, or Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, all democratically elected governments. Oh, but there's communist ties there, so what do they do then? They can justify them going in there, overthrowing the government, securing those natural resources, and playing the global game of control. So
welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and I am very excited to be joined once again by probably my favorite guest of all time. This has got to be his fifth appearance. No, maybe sixth. I lost count. And if you don't remember, this is the one and only Gavin Nascimento. He is an intelligence analyst, a conspiracy realist. He's absolutely renowned for his incredible attention to detail and adherence to facts. He does not deal in theories. He sticks to what can be proved and vetted and sourced. And that is evidenced by his incredible reputation, and he's a friend of mine. I love him. Gavin, thanks for beaming in, brother. Great to have you back.
Thank you for having me, and thank you very much for the kind words, man. It's very much an honor, so appreciate it.
You're welcome, brother. So, man, I'm excited about this. We're kicking this off, man. And I've been learning, and I have a lot to learn, about, because those are the events that shaped Russia at the turn of the century, and those revolutions that they experienced, they have indeed shaped this, not just that part of the world, but also the rest of the world. The implications and ripple effect that it had is big. So I'm excited to dive into this subject with you.
Yeah, 100%, man. I think what you are alluding to is how, in an intangible way, it's shaped the ideological landscape internationally in many instances, right? The notion of communism and socialism, which there's variations of that, right? We can't say it's one thing because it means different things to different people. But understanding this history, which it's so widely misunderstood, despite the fact that so many people kind of throw out the word communism and the ideology and so on, but they don't really know the duplicity and the complexity of what took place during their time.
That's for sure. And communism, socialism, all the isms, sadly, people are unaware that they were designed as this shiny lure, as basically bait for the people, to clamor for, to imagine. But in my understanding and research, and what I've come to the conclusion of, at least for now, is that they're all a means to the same end, and that is a totalitarian government, ideally ruled by one single entity, and we're going to get into this, but, I think that what went on in Russia at that time was another, head of the Hydra that was attempting to do what it the long plan. And, there's some seriously questionable actors who were instigating and, beginning this revolution, whereas people still believe that it was about the people, and it was about the farmers, and it was about them going. They had it with the aristocracy, and maybe that's also true, but I know there's so much more to it.
Yeah, 100%, man. So first and foremost, just the way it's framed and contextualized for people that are totally foreign to the subject is the Bolshevik Revolution, and that's because the elements that ended up rising to the top were the Bolshevik demographic, but they actually weren't a very popular movement. They weren't liked internally. It's a similar notion to originally what happened with the Nazis in Germany. And of course, as you know, these two things are interconnected, which I suppose we could maybe lead into later on. But yes, the Bolshevik Revolution, they would never, if you take a look at the seminal work of Professor Anthony Sutton, like he's He's the world's leading authority as far as I'm concerned on this particular topic. Even if you take a look at somebody from the establishment perspective, which is Professor Richard Pipes, who was a Harvard historian, and he was actually frequently contracted by the US government. He also led something called Team B, which was composed or put together by the Central Intelligence Agency. If you read his work, he basically said that Anthony Sutton is the dude. He's the go-to guy. But the reason why he's considered controversial is because his work just comes to conclusions that make people feel very uncomfortable. But essentially what Anthony Sutton said is, the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Bolsheviks, they would have never, ever have been able to come out on top of that particular event had they not received the funding, the patronage, and the weapon supplies of people from the West. Specifically, he implicates the Wall Street interests. And then that just goes on and it snowballs to the point that even after the communist revolution, and I don't want to jump the gun, we can slowly do things, but as time goes on, the Soviet Union itself, the military capacity and technological capability, that comes almost exclusively, so over 90%, according to Professor Anthony Sutton, it comes exclusively from the West and specifically the US.
Wow.
Yeah, mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. And it's not like it stopped, I mean, it's...
No.
I would just remember seeing not too long ago, reports that came out right after Vietnam, blowing the whistle on the fact that it was the United States through Russia supplying, the North Vietnamese with what they needed to keep the war going. Like some
100%, yeah.
It just never stops.
People within that specific conflict that you're talking about, yes, U.S. soldiers were getting killed by U.S. manufactured weapons. And this is a recurring theme throughout history. This is something that people just have not grasped. And unfortunately, we do have the meticulous work of folks like Professor Anthony Sutton to help guide us through that. But then we also have a duty, now that we have a greater historical lens from which we can view events, and we have a much larger library, so to speak, and it's easier to access information, that we then take this exceptional work that he did and we expand upon it further to help connect the dots.
Yeah. And so where to begin, brother? Most people think the revolution began, and in fact, it did in many ways, but I know that there was more than one start to it. I know history would have us believe that it was Tsar Nicholas and his family, which, now I think people are starting to look back and say, wait a minute, was he really gunned down because he was such a tyrannical, bastard to his people, or was there something more going on? And so if you had to put it in chronological order, where would you say that the revolution really started?
Well, the thing is, it's a bit complex. Well, I wouldn't say it's black and white. It's a bit gray. So the Tsarist regime was repressive in many ways, and horrible things were done in Russia. So there was a protest, and innocent bystanders got gunned down. It was like a mass murder. We also need to remember, this is something we spoke about briefly in a previous podcast, that the Tsar of Russia, he was related to the King of England, and he's related to the Kaiser in Germany.
They were like first cousins, weren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Really
they're all
close.
first cousins. Yeah, they're all first cousins, and so these distinctions of he's Russian and he's German and he's British. At the end of the day, they're coming from the same family. Europe has got a whole crazy story in that particular regard, and they're just playing with people's lives, and for them it's a chess game. But of course, the pawns are people's lives. Now, naturally, as a result of that, it's not that one of them is good and one of them is bad. It's more inclined towards them all being bad, just different variations. And so it was a repressive regime. But at the same time, and this is something that has taken me quite a lot of legwork and heavy lifting to to contextualize in my mind, to fully frame, because it's so foreign in terms of the way our perception collectively has evolved. But in the past, there was a strong kind of underlying stereotype that the Jewish people were terrorists. And this was in Russia predominantly, and there was legitimate terrorism taking place. So there were traces of truth to that. Of course, there were also easier scapegoats, and then over time, because of the repression on the one end, and then the radicalization of different demographics, and it wasn't just the Jewish demographic in the Russian Empire, but different elements, right? So the terrorist that was being fomented, there were different ethnicities involved in that. It wasn't even predominantly Jewish, but over time, there started to emerge different ideological viewpoints, which everything is always interconnected and attached, right? So you have an action, you have a reaction, and naturally any ideology from the individual to the collective is always somehow a reflection of the society that they grow up in or their experiences that they have.
Right.
Now, a seminal publication to understand in relation to this kind of revolutionary ethos is obviously Karl Marx, right? So you need to understand Karl Marx's works. And this was very appealing. And it was a very religious institution under Tsar Nicholas and Tsar Russia. It was very orthodox kind of Christian.
Right. That's right.
And so Karl Marx emerged and he said, that's the opium of the masses. It's bullshit. And this was very appealing because people were being repressed. And naturally, as is true with any authoritarian regime, it doesn't matter whether it's democratic or Christian or whatever it is, Islam or Jewish. Underneath that, you have the same ideology of elitism, of exploiting people. And so
Division,
naturally,
intolerance, basically.
All of it. It's the same shit, right? It's just different remixes. Same shit, different toilets.
Right.
And so what happens then is the demographic that's within that population, they may not necessarily be well educated or researched and so on and so forth, but based on their experience and based on the inborn morality that generally exists within all people, you can start to see, okay, this is hypocritical bullshit. And so, of course, then somebody can come along like a Karl Marx and he can say, look, man, that's all nonsense and it's opium of the masses. I've got the real truth for you. And so it became very appealing, and it was the people had already been very radicalized. That's why oftentimes you'll get a population, they're always getting oppressed, they're always getting brutalized. They don't really have any other recourse, and so they become radicalized and they're willing to do whatever it may be. And in the midst of all of this, of course, you get some voices and some individuals that are far more radical than others. Now, this is, generally speaking, a small minority. And the other people are decent enough. They want introductory freedoms. They want to be able to have a decentralized economy. And that's what was going on in Russia. They wanted a decentralized kind of a structure a bit more. They didn't want things to be crazy, just basic human nature. It's not that Russians are crazy, Palestinians are crazy.
And you tell me if this is accurate, at least at first, they basically just wanted to fucking own some land of their own, like they because I think at the time it was all, what was it, a serfdom or, Well, so look, this is what's very interesting about that too. So I think it was Tsar Nicholas, I can't remember if it was the second or the third. I mean, that stuff gets confusing. But one of the Tsars, right? And this actually ties in, I mean, I don't want to go off track here, but just a piece of interesting side trivia, how it ties into the founding of Zionist Israel. This guy, fully aware of kind of the climate of the public and awareness, and naturally every ruling structure has to adapt to accommodate and therefore maintain their own power, their illusion, like, you need me, come on guys, you need me. Right.
And so what he did in turn was he actually started granting what appeared on the surface to be personal ownership and an end to the feudal system. Now what you had, and the people were very welcoming of this, he was quite beneficent in that particular regard. Now some people, you can criticize to what extent he was being genuine. I have my criticisms of every single ruler that always presents, I'm trying to help you out. Like, if you're really trying to help people out, you come with just a dramatically different system in which you aren't even needed. Right. But essentially, he came and he said, look, we're going to end feudalism. we're going to give private ownership. You're going to have, I think, freedom of religion. It was just a different revolutionary policies.
What was this guy's name again?
It was one of the Russian czars. It was Tsar Nicholas II or III. And the way to actually find out specifically, to narrow it down for you, he ended up getting assassinated.
Oh, okay.
And after his assassination, that's when the pogroms against the Jewish community began. It was a direct result of this, because then his son came into power. His son almost blamed the Jewish community exclusively because, like I said, they were associated stereotypically with terrorism. And there were Jews involved in his assassination, but it wasn't just exclusively Jews. And anyways, this triggered the initial wave of immigration to Palestine. So this is very closely connected to Zionism as well. But yes, that's something that you have to bring into great question, because the guy was making revolutionary steps, and then instead you've got this demographic that, like, okay, no, we're just going to assassinate this dude.
Right.
And the people that were involved in these revolutionary activities, they weren't. Oftentimes they came from a bit of privilege themselves, like they were well educated and stuff.
Yeah.
And they weren't necessarily the actual impoverished demographic that would have likely benefited from this policy.
That should be a red flag for fucking everyone. When the guy stirring up the masses has nothing in common with them whatsoever, that should be a red flag. I mean, just very manipulation.
100%. But just very quickly, like what I was saying is, so you had all of these voices that were becoming disillusioned, and there were big changes ideologically and from an awareness standpoint taking place in Russia. But again, the common people, the average person, they just wanted to have simple introductory freedoms, right? Like, I just want a little piece of the pie. And then the guy that started to offer it from a leadership standpoint, they assassinate him. His son comes in. His son now reacts to that, and he's very repressive, and he brings back all of these authoritarian measures. But that small voice, that very radical voice, they again, which were the Bolsheviks, they wouldn't have risen to the top because they just created a tyrannical institution as well, an authoritarian institution. You just took the face mask of the Tsar and you replaced it with the Bolsheviks. Right. They would never have emerged to the top because it was something known as the White Russians, who were far more popular. But the Bolsheviks would never have risen to the top. It's because they got the patronage of very powerful and, ironically, capitalists, predatory capitalists from the West.
And the question becomes, first, like, what was the motivation? And when you look at some of the characters involved, it really begs the question, Karl Marx himself had, was notorious for some very, very, I don't like to throw around the term evil, you know what I mean? Because in many ways, I think it's just, an absence of something evil, but the man was dark, I mean, he did not say good things behind closed doors. I don't know if he had any good intentions whatsoever. He was pretty maniacal with some of his radical ideas, and he was kind of...
Well, he was willing to sacrifice a very large number of innocent people, kind of the notion of the ends justify the means. And that's always, whenever you hear anybody do that, that's a red flag, man.
Absolutely. Bill Cooper was just saying that in a lecture I was watching. He was like, they justify their actions by saying this is going to create, a world where there's peace, a world where there's not so much. But if you have to kill a billion people to achieve it, then are you not the very thing you imagine you're preventing?
Is there no implications behind mass murder? Like, do you think that you just eliminate something and poof, it's gone? No, energy gets transferred. Yeah, that's just going to cause trauma and just far more chaos. The thing is, these people are so difficult to understand them, man. But it is. I think they're partly delusional. They partly want to, kind of like that Batman proverb from the film. You get some people, they just want to watch the world burn. They're sadistic. Yeah. There's a variation of them. Some of them are just obsessed with control and they're fixated on controlling everything and everybody. It's kind of the Rockefeller's ethos. Yeah.
It's a wide spectrum.
I mean,
and
it's a very broad spectrum, man. But in regards to like the motivation, so I think one of the best authorities again on this is Professor Anthony Sutton, which one is now it's a bit too loud. Professor Anthony Sutton, and what he points out is that Russia at that time represented the largest market on the planet, untapped, which is to say you got all of these resources, this crazy business potential here. And then in that same regard, the Tsar was in the midst of, in fact, revolutionizing their economy from an industrial standpoint. They had two vehicles. Right. This was already way back in the past there. And naturally and there's different layers, right? There's different motivations. Like this, again, just going back to the variations of the personalities within elitism. But the most introductory for the average person to wrap their head around is that, yes, this represented a massive market. When I say a massive market, I mean huge business opportunities. You've got all of these resources. I mean, just dollar signs, baby, big time. Yeah. But something that I've further documented, and this is where I was alluding to about how we need to take the great work that we are standing on today. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Mm-hmm. We need to take that and we need to expand upon it, because the pursuit of truth is an unending journey, right? And then we can all contribute. It's this great, incredible story that we all have the opportunity to contribute towards. And what I've found, and again, I mean, this is, I don't want to jump the gun here, it may be a bit of a mind stretch for people, but essentially by them also getting control of Russia, right? The best way to control an outcome, to control a conflict, is you literally control your quote-unquote enemy. And so what they did, because this relationship with Russia went on for much longer than just the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, it goes on in some aspects to this very day. What that allowed them to do then is they had, for example, and this comes later on, the Cold War, this conflict. While they're simultaneously building up the US government, they're building up the Russian government, they're building up the capability militarily of both. And then what happens? Oh, well, there's a communist government over there, let's say in Guatemala with Arbenz, or in the Congo with Patrice Lumumba, or Salvador Allende in Chile, or Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, all democratically elected governments. Oh, but there's communist ties there, so what do they do then? They can justify them going in there, overthrowing the government, securing those natural resources, and playing the global game of control. So it's multifaceted, and I would say on the one end, yes, on the introductory basics, yes, it's about money. On another level, you can control the resources, right, for the people that like to play that game. And then on the deepest level, it's about global governance. You can now take the proverbial game of risk, the proverbial global chess game, and you are the primary grandmaster chess player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's funny because some people were like, you know, well, that's one of the things that, just to, not to jump ahead too far in time, but that Putin did, you know, and that the one of the reasons why he's hated is because he got rid of a lot of the, or at least made it very difficult for a lot of the Zionist oligarchs that were ruling Russia before he, strangled the power away from a lot of them. But other people were like, yeah, but that's just because he became one of them, essentially. And I don't know how much of that is true or not, but I do know that, some of the most terrorist, blood-hungry people came from that revolution, and they were, as far as I understand,
including going to Israel, man.
Yeah.
So some of the founding fathers of Israel were actually leading figures in the Russia, in more than one. There was a failed one prior to that, but yeah, they were leading figures that were the founders of Israel, such as a guy by the name of Pinchas Rutenberg. He was a leading figure. He was actually recognized as an assassin of a guy named Father Gapon. He went ahead and he assassinated him. He's also the guy that brought electricity to Israel. There's another guy named Meir Dizengoff. Meir Dizengoff, he was the first mayor of Israel. He actually spent a couple months in jail because he was involved in a terrorist group known as the People's Will, if I recall it correctly.
Yeah, and all of them from Russia, right? I mean, essentially from
Russian Empire. I mean, look, it was a very big area, but yes, they're coming from the same place, man. And,
is that the Khazars? When people talk about the Khazars, and how if you go back far enough, it's it would be the almost like the Mongols, like the like Genghis Khan and the marauding hordes and the way that they swept from the Far East into Europe, and that many I mean, David Icke writes about this a lot and talks about how the truth is that the Semites left in Palestine are the Palestinians, and that the people who moved into Israel they're almost predominantly Khazarian, and the people who aren't from the Khazarian line, which is the Eastern European down into Poland and Germany, that they're discriminated against and marginalized. Like the Arab Jews are subject to a lot of discrimination, and they'll tell you that themselves. So it's just wild, man.
Yeah, look, without losing the plot too much in relation to the topic at hand, the easiest way to wrap one's head around it is in relation to Ashkenazi Jews. And there was a genuine Ashkenazi supremacy at that time. It's a bit difficult to dig up now, but it all ties into eugenics. Eugenics was going on in Nazi Germany, it was going on in America, it was going on in Britain.
Very popular.
It went on in China, that's what the one-child policy was about. It still goes on. It was going on in India, and then also it was going on in Israel. That's right, boys and girls. There's Jewish supremacy, Ashkenazi supremacy. Another guy, just very quickly, for people to check out, Professor Avi Shleim, he's world-renowned. He's a Mizrahi Jew, so you get different distinctions. And he talks about when he and his family had to move into Israel, how they were sprayed with DDT, and they were discriminated against because they weren't Ashkenazi Jews.
Mm-hmm. No, that's, in my opinion, that is the granddaddy of white supremacy, because the Ashkenazi Jews are essentially Eastern and Eastern European. That their lineage goes to there.
Western in the modern sense. They're Western in the modern sense.
Right. That's right. And from my research, what I've found is that those are the ones that have been predominantly the most outspoken in favor of not just eugenics, but also making moves in the societies that they end up in the governance of, to make sure that they are the creme de la creme, where the money is going. The majority of the
leadership to this day is Ashkenazi Jews in Israel, to this very day, even after all of the public awareness has been raised. Now, naturally, they've inserted, just as they have done in other cultures, where you'll put a Barack Obama, you always put somebody in there that'll play your game, you know what I mean? Oh, he's got a different skin color, diversity, yay!
Right.
But it's always about ideology, man.
George Bush is his uncle.
Well, it's like, at the end of the day, they're all doing the same shit, man. And it's not so much about a skin color or anything like that. It's just about an ideology. It's as simple as that. You can go down the list of, for example, serial killers, and guess what? You're going to find black serial killers, white serial killers, Arab serial killers, Jewish serial killers. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with skin color. It's just simply a matter of ideology.
Serial killers, it may be mostly white, but killers in general, yeah. Serial killers are a unique brand of crazy, but killers in general, absolutely. And so
I just, what I think, just very quickly about it, I think they're just amateurs, man. The Ted Bundys and stuff. I think they're amateurs, and then the dudes that go into politics and finance, they're just experts.
Oh, fundamental difference. Those are the fucking those are the true serial killers.
Oh, 100%,
you get
man.
People like George fucking Herbert Walker, and or Billy Clinton, or this very
all of them. They're on another level, man. Look at Bibi Netanyahu, how he goes on TV, and the dude just. Yeah, and then he'll go on TV and he'll be like, he just gaslights the whole world.
just belligerent.
You got to listen to this to believe it. The ICC is calling, saying we committing crimes against humanity. Can you believe it? It's like, bruh, you know exactly what you are. You depraved piece of shit.
Yeah.
Really.
It's the gaslighting is on another level. It's just really, I don't know. Maybe it's always been like this, but it just seems like obscene. You know, the way that he goes and the way that his people talk.
He's on another level.
The way that they scream at the United Nations, saying that we are the most moral army in the world, and like as if we're not seeing thousands of videos of body parts of children.
Well, I mean, there's also dozens and dozens and dozens. I mean, within that one video I put together alone, you got over 50 soldiers that have been served there. They've been there, right. And they are saying how immoral it is, and killing innocent children and terrorizing families. But it is what it is. The thing is, unfortunately, and that's another podcast we can do hopefully, is that the Christian demographic, the Christian Zionist demographic, they have no knowledge in relation to actually digging into the historical notions of what's taken there. So from a political standpoint, but religiously they're very clued up. And in the Bible it says this, and this aligns with scripture.
Woe unto
not realizing
any nation.
that, 100%. Well, and also just not realizing that the means of a psychopath is that the moment you have some kind of superstitious belief, and I'm not trying to debate with people, but if you're a decent human being, and I personally do believe there's a God and a creator, then that's fantastic. But the moment you become beholden to a piece of paper that historically has been manipulated, and then you say that, in this
God wrote this.
Look, God wrote it, or even it's divinely inspired. But then there's something in there that says, like in 1948, this is going to take place, right? And then it happens with Israel, and that's divinely providential. Guess what? I mean, psychopaths, they love that kind of shit. They will it happen that way, because then they can hide behind that shit forever. It's been attributed to Albert Einstein that unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. And that is the reality. Deception relies on unthinking obedience. Truth, it wants to be questioned. It wants to be investigated, because that's how its power is established. Anyways, sorry, man. We jumping all over the place here. I suppose
it was bound to happen.
Let's reel it back in to the Russian Revolution.
So there was a lot of death when the Tsar was taken out. When he was not the first one, I think it was the second one, right? The one who had the whole family executed in the basement. Was that the son's family of the one who retaliated?
It was one of the family members. It wasn't, I think, the immediate son of the guy that got assassinated. I think it may have been his later progenitor, but I can't remember. People have to look it up. It gets a bit confusing, like I said. You got to, because they're always naming their children the same names, and But it's essentially, yes, it was a horrible, horrible purge. They did terrible, just crazy, rabid things on a massive, massive scale. That's another thing. They killed the skilled labor off. And this is why they had to start to import technological know-how from the West, from the United States and elsewhere, because they killed skilled labor. They went on a mindless purge.
Millions of people, right?
Yeah,
millions.
100%, man. Well, look, I don't know the exact figures. I know, like in communist China, yes, then we're talking about just insane numbers with Mao. And something very similar happened there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that, some of the more insane numbers came a little later, but I think it did start there. We did, first it was Lenin, right? Lenin was in, and then Stalin.
It was Lenin and Trotsky, man. And so I suppose that's actually something we can get into. So we know that Vladimir Lenin, like this is now officially acknowledged, they were essentially, the term doesn't come to my mind, but the equivalent of being excommunicated when you get banished from a particular region. And he and Leon Trotsky were both banished from Russia. They weren't allowed in because they were involved in potentially revolutionary or terrorist activities. Mm-hmm. Vladimir Lenin was in Germany. So what did the German establishment do? They went ahead and facilitated and helped finance. We know this now. This is open public knowledge. helped to facilitate his journey back to Russia because they wanted to use him to create subversion to bring the Russian Tsar and its empire down, that structure. Then, and this is where it gets even crazier, Leon Trotsky, we know now that he went to the United States. Now, he had very little money, this dude. He wrote for some kind of newspaper column. He made very little money. But yet he goes to the US, he stays in this high profile apartment that was paid for 3 months in advance. He's going around, he's traveling with a chauffeur in a limousine. And then when he leaves the United States and now he's going back to Russia, he's going through Canada, Canadian intelligence, they stop him at the border. This dude has $10,000 on him, which is a huge sum of money back then.
Yeah.
And then mysteriously, they let him go because after a month, they held him, they detained him. Eventually, there's some high-profile phone calls. He gets released, and he has a passport that was specifically signed off on from the president, Woodrow Wilson.
No shit.
No shit, brother. And then what happens? He goes to Russia. Vladimir Lenin is coming from the other side. Boom. Bolshevik Revolution.
And not long after World War I. Right?
This went... If I recall correctly, man, this happened in the midst of World War I. It was 1917, I think.
Was it 17?
Yeah, I think...
Yeah.
And remember the Sykes-Picot Agreement? So we had the Sykes-Picot Agreement during World War I, and it got leaked. And this is another thing to consider. You always got to think about the bigger landscape politically. In the Sykes-Picot Agreement, it was exposed that whilst the British were promising the Arabs Palestine in different parts, like everything's connected, right? They were promising the Arabs Palestine in different parts if they fought for the British. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, through the Sykes-Picot Agreement, what did we find? We discovered that the UK government, the Russian government, the French government, and I think Italy was also involved. They secretly saying, no, we're going to screw over the Arabs. We're going to carve up the whole entire landscape for ourselves. And this was leaked through the Bolshevik Revolution, which is interesting, right? That's a very incriminating document to release. So who was involved in releasing that information? I mean, we can say it's the Bolsheviks, but surely a call like that may be coming from somewhere higher. And that it just reminds me now, because that's in the file cabinet, proverbial file cabinet from way back. I need to actually dig into that because I'd be very interested to find out.
Yeah. Reminds me of I've been studying false flags of World War I and just how timely some of the letters and like
right.
like when Russia apparently, according to the United States government, made a deal with Mexico and then they put it in the headlines and they said Russia's,
Oh wait, I think you're talking about Germany, right? With the Zimmerman.
Germany. That's right.
I can't remember.
Germany, not Russia.
That's so far back in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right. And another reason why we have to go to war, it's just.
It's so played out, man.
It is.
And yet people still fall for the shit. It's just it is the wildest thing, man. Like. Yeah, sometimes they get a bit creative here and there, but for the most part, yeah, it's the same old thing.
Same thing.
And then with historical hindsight, people can look back and they say, "Oh, look, everybody got screwed." I suppose we're also living in a very unique age where I remember, man, 12 years ago, like talking about false flags was just, that's just wild and crazy, and now it's almost a household topic in many different parts of the world. So that shows that some genuine progression has been made, because all progress in relation to creating positive change has to first be made in relation to raising awareness.
That's right. I tell people all the time, they're like, so why, what's the difference? Why tell people no one's going to do anything? I'm like, how can people do anything if they don't know? You know what I mean? Like half the people who are watching this post had no idea.
100%, man. Action, especially those who are very active, very proactive. Yeah. Action and proactivity, or so-called proactivity that's rooted in ignorance, is fucking dangerous. Mm-hmm. It's dangerous. So awareness is absolutely peremptory. It has to come first. It's promoting awareness is revolutionary. Don't give a shit what anybody else says.
You're right.
It is one of the most, if not the most revolutionary thing you can do, because unless people have awareness, which is synonymous with giving people vision of different options, then you can't create positive change.
That's right.
I've said this before and I'll say it again, man. Good intentions are not synonymous with good outcomes. What do I mean by that? I mean,
That's for sure.
Oftentimes one of the silly little kind of unthinking knee-jerk one-liners that people say is, oh, you just got to have a good heart. You just got to be kind. That's bullshit, unfortunately. I wish it was like that. But the reality is you also have to be well-educated, because it's the people with the biggest hearts and the smallest minds that are the easiest to control and manipulate.
That's right. And we see it time and time again. So back to Russia and the greater implications of the Bolsheviks and why they tie into so many things that contributed both to World War I and World War II. And I know that it's very multifaceted, but when you're talking about the Bolsheviks, for people who are listening, who are we talking about? 99% Jewish descent, or at least Theodore Herzl wasn't Jewish, and a bunch of them aren't really Jewish, but they use Jewish religion.
Yeah. So look, it gets tricky because this is where it gets confusing, right? So you get, obviously, people being Jewish, a distinction in relation to religion. So that's one part. Right. But then you get people being Jewish in relation to being ethnically Jewish.
Yeah.
Right. Now, where it gets confusing with the ethnicity profile is that this is something that kind of emerged in more recent history. So it wasn't thoroughly agreed upon. Yeah. So some people argue that it was invented, including some Jewish scholars themselves. There's a publication, in fact, that's dedicated to that topic. But nonetheless, where we are at today is that people say that, yes, there is a distinctly ethnic Jewish people. And it's not just one Jewish people. You get Mizrahi Jews, which are coming from the Middle East and from North Africa. From the Middle East, then from North Africa and Spain and Portugal, you get Sephardic Jews. And then you get the Western kind of European Jews, which are Ashkenazi Jews. That's where it gets very confusing about, okay, what exactly is a Jew? If you look at Hitler, for example, that was one of his leading contentions. He was Jews, of course he was very paranoid, legitimately, that dude was a little bit over the top, man. He was very over the top, as we all know now.
Yeah.
But he would say basically that there is no ethnic Jews. It's a clandestine group that uses the Jewish religion to mask what they're really doing. That was his whole thing.
Well, that was his experience with it. Unfortunately, that's not what's true for the whole.
Exactly. It was his subjective experience. And that's why it's so important for people always just to consider introductory psychology. What was this person's individual experience? And so naturally, and this is why that old expression is so true, that the foundation of all knowledge and wisdom is the awareness of one's own ignorance, the awareness of your limitations on your experience. It's just a little raindrop. It doesn't encompass everything and everyone. And he clearly wasn't fully aware of that, and he didn't understand it. But in regards to, yes, with the Bolsheviks, there were indeed Jews in leading positions. And this is where, you start to get into very tricky territory. But historically, it's always been that way. You will find powerful Jewish influences in positions of power. Even today, right? You got BlackRock, you got Larry Fink, you got George Soros. But that doesn't mean it's exclusively a Jewish conspiracy, right? Bill Gates, is he Jewish? The Rockefeller family, are they Jewish? The Bush family, the Harriman family, and so on and so forth. But yes, there was a strong demographic of Jews within Russia. And, speaking about Nazi Germany, this ethos and ideology of communism, so we have an action, And one of the reactions was fascism. Now, the two, if you really want to get beyond all the bullshit, are very closely related, which is authoritarianism, statism, and collectivism. But the fundamental difference is the fascist element tends to rely more on tradition. Man, we were powerful, we were great, we need these principles to keep us strong, and we need one supreme leader.
Right.
And then on the other end, with communism or socialism, it's more about, we need to be progressive. We need to move beyond the traditions. The traditions are holding us back. But at the end of the day, the people that rise to the top on both of those are going to be the same individuals. Right. The elitists, the people who are fixated on controlling everybody, the authoritarians, they want central power, and so on and so forth. And anyways, in relations to what happened with the Bolsheviks in communist Russia and that bloodbath, in Germany, whilst this was going on, there was a lot of paranoia and fear that communism and socialism was going to come to Germany and there's going to be a bloodbath. In fact, also around the time of the First World War, just after the First World War, there was a group known as the Spartacus Society, something along those lines. And Rosa Luxemburg, she was a leading figure in that. Tens of thousands of communist Jews, they wanted to overthrow the German government. And it was, in fact, old school veterans from World War I in Germany that they ended up pushing back against that. But this had a profound influence on Hitler and much of the Nazi leadership, that were directly involved in repressing that.
A lot of things that they were doing, including the fact that they were, selling Germany out in World War I, obviously didn't bode well.
Yeah, exactly. It's very complex. And the person that was in charge of the central bank as well during the time of World War I was Max Warburg. And the Warburg family, especially through Kuhn-Loeb and Company. Kuhn-Loeb and Company was also implicated in helping to finance the communist revolution. Notable figures specifically is Jacob Schiff and Otto H. Kahn. And something really interesting.
People who started the Federal Reserve in the United States. I wonder if it's related.
Well, Paul Warburg, exactly. Well, look at this. You got Max Warburg and Paul Warburg. They're brothers. Max Warburg is sitting on the private central bank of Germany. He's the head of that. And then Paul Warburg, he's considered the architect of the private central bank in the U.S., the Federal Reserve. And this is why people oftentimes we get so caught up, even now in this modern age, like Russia is going to go to war with the U.S. and China and blah, blah, blah. At the highest level, these individuals, these corporations, and they don't have an allegiance. It blows my mind how people think, for example, you look at an event like the crash with Wall Street, where people, domestic elitists, right, domestic governments, domestic industrialists, and so on, they siphon away massive amounts of money. They treat you like the biggest piece of shit on the planet. And then now you think they're going to fight for you in a war with people they do business with? Come on, guys. No, it's not how it works.
No. It's not.
It's not how it works, unfortunately. But yes, so what happened in communist Russia, and this is where it's really interesting. For example, you have a movement you have these Wall Street figures that were involved, JP Morgan interest, Rockefeller interest, Kuhn-Loeb and Company on one level. And then with the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany, so this is a reaction now. If you look at, let's say, if you read Hitler's book, which I know everybody's scared to do it, but it's important to understand the ideology of an individual, if only for the purpose of being able to mentally defend yourself, right? Or coming up with some kind of strong argument to oppose it. And so if you read it, you can tell that dude he's obsessed with rebuffing communism. He views it as being the devil and the most evil thing. Now, the thing is, in his mind, it was also synonymous with Jewish people. That's where he got it wrong. What he didn't perceive is that those who were behind the communist revolution were also going to be behind his rise to power. Because again, very similar to what happened with the Bolsheviks, the Nazis weren't specifically that influential in the beginning. They were relatively unknown.
They needed funding for that, and they got it.
Exactly. You need funding, boys and girls. It's not just, like Nazis, they're like, Hitler. such a great speaker.
It's
and
a great
people
idea.
Just,
Everyone's
people
going to
just
rally
fell.
behind it. No.
Yeah, and they just fell under his hypnotic spell, like he's over there doing
Right.
some kind of voodoo shit. No, somebody has to help you out along the way, and he had massive, unprecedented amounts of support. He was very clever. I mean,
He was clever,
He
and
was
he
clever,
was
and he had some
loved
clever
by,
people around
by
him.
most of the German people. Really,
Yeah, look,
did.
he was genuinely loved, man. I did a podcast recently with Erasmus and Joel, and where I was just basically saying people need to start to broach this topic from a more honest and objective standpoint, man. If you read, like, let's say Mein Kampf, if you aren't well-educated, like really well-educated in critical thinking and understanding global affairs, you will find that appealing because he makes some very strong arguments. Then at the same time, what did he do? He helped to take a people that had been repressed psychologically and also economically, starts to give them employment. And then also what fascism is about. Now, I know people say, oh no, but it was socialism, National Socialism. National Socialism is kind of its own thing, but it is gravitated more towards fascism, which is to say, we need to go back to our traditions, right? We need the whole thing about the Third Reich is the Third Empire. The first two empires were also Germanic. He's talking about the so-called Holy Roman Empire, which was actually Germanic. And then he's talking about the Second Empire under Otto von Bismarck. So, and it was all about tradition. We need to go back to Germanic values, and we need to find our strength in. And so when you're feeling very weak and you have a culture that's being acculturated, which you can see going on with this woke ideology bullshit.
Yeah.
And, something that's been deeply inculcated, for example, because the demographic that's very appealing for Trump supporters is young white men. Mm-hmm. That demographic has really been, you are responsible as an entire collective people for all the horrible wrongdoings and colonialism and all of these things. Mm-hmm. And the moment you try to say, well, geez, like I can't have any pride, I have to just be ashamed of being white. What happens? Psychologically, these people feel very down. And then you can present something that gives them a sense of strength, which is what Donald Trump is. Now, I'm not saying he's Adolf Hitler. I'm just saying there are correspondences in the introductory ethos there of how the human psychology works. Now, the same thing happened with Hitler in Germany. You had a very repressed people, except it was on a whole other level. And so what did they do? They gave them economic refuge, which is essential. As a father, at the end of the day, your babies, you want to take care of your babies. And if somebody's going to help you do that,
Germany was starving and they were killing themselves. There was, they didn't
have
anything to eat.
There were so many bad things going on in Germany. It's hard to quantify, man. It was also known as kind of being the most sexually depraved place in the world, because whenever there's economic depravity and people are desperate, guess what? They, especially with women, like it goes so far beyond kind of the silly theatrical presentations that are made, and you see the film like they're getting kidnapped. More often than not, it's economic desperation, man. And there's other variations to that, but fundamentally, one of the leading causes is people economically are so desperate that they can be preyed upon by somebody else who will lure them in, like a guy who's skilled at psychological warfare, like Andrew Tate, very skilled at psychological warfare and gaslighting the whole entire world. And then you can economically kind of entrap them, and now you're giving them the introductory basics, because whether we like it or not, the way the human survival mode is, not everybody's been there. I have been there. When you go to this place, you go to your most primordial way of thinking, which is survival. And in that particular regard, I mean, you don't think straight, and naturally you will be more amenable to doing certain things that are in conflict with the way that just basic human decency.
Oh, absolutely.
And so in Germany, there was all of this. There was crazy prostitution. You got a mother and a daughter
Drugs.
team. Just everything, man. It was really
a mess.
bad.
It was. I saw the paintings of that era when I was in Berlin. Not Berlin. Where was I? Maybe I was in Berlin, but God, they were dark, man. It was dark. It was like some painters really captured what was happening, and it was some. I was like, it was ghoulish. I mean, it was really dark. Like, so
there were horrible things going on in Germany, man, and it was calculated. That's the thing. At the end of World War I, and we've spoken about this before, what happened? Well, the German, and it's not even the establishment. This is what really frustrates me. Frustration is not even the word, but what happens worldwide is you always have these elites. It's going on right now. where they start to foment and instigate war and they're talking shit and they're getting loud, knowing that they aren't the ones that are going to have to suffer and die for this. It's going to be the common people. Even when there's sanctions and then the leaders get on there and they say, oh, just stay strong, my people. It's not really affecting the so-called leader. It's the common people that have to deal with inflation and so on and so forth. And so it's the exact same thing in this particular regard, where with World War I, Germany, after being decimated, they are forced as part of the kind of the imposed conditions of the winners of the war on Germany. No, you have to accept responsibility, full responsibility, for the outbreak of World War I. Anybody that has researched World War I knows that is utter ridiculous bullshit. It wasn't that one party was responsible. They were all involved in one level or another. And Germany, in fact, offered peace terms. I would say the aggressor, far more so in World War I, so we're talking about pre-Nazi era, was more so the so-called winners, the so-called victors. Germany was just technologically at that time, they were starting to raise concerns because this was the introduction of oil. They started to get a route that was going directly to the Middle East. I mean, where did Britain send their first troops? To their oil fields. That's what happened. Right. That's the first place, because it's the same. It's not because some guy got assassinated and people sentimentally cared about him. No, it's about it was about resources. Yeah, Franz Ferdinand. Okay, cool story, bro.
Right.
And so they had these horrible sanctions that were imposed on them, reparations. And it took them almost a century, century for Germany
They're still
to pay
paying
those reparations.
They're still paying Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, which is a whole other story as well, right?
Yeah.
And, these reparations that were getting paid, the common people, man, the inflation went so crazy that it required millions of their currency to pay for bread. So what happens? I think the worst year of the inflation was 1923. That's the year that Hitler and the Nazis tried to stage their coup. So, and I suppose this is also very significant. At the same time, so 1923, that's when Hitler and the Nazis, very, small, unpopular movement. They kind of just considered, who's this kook? He's crazy. And so he gets arrested. It's a failed coup. He gets thrown in prison. Doesn't even do a year in jail, which is very strange because you're trying to overthrow the government. And in 1924, he gives a very powerful speech. The judge allows him to speak. The international press is there. It gets widely circulated, by the evil Jewish press. They're trying to now prop him up. Sure, cool. That doesn't really make any sense, but okay. So it gets propped up. His powerful speech. He gives a very impassioned speech. It goes worldwide, viral, pretty much, right? And the very interesting thing about this is that same year, in 1924. Now he also gets released in 1924. He gave his speech in 1924.
Right.
That same year, we have something known as the Charles Dawes Plan, the Dawes Plan. And this is a plan now from Wall Street where they're going to start floating loans to Germany to help them with their repayments for the reparations.
So they created the debt. The bankers created massive reparations for Germany as punitive punishment, and they wanted to punish Germany. They in both wars, the idea was to fucking punish the Germans.
The horrible things were done to Germany in World War I, man. It was also a trade involvement that killed around 600,000 people.
There's reportedly, there was reportedly almost 12 million who starved after. We let Stalin basically fucking starve him out, and we pretended to look the other way. But there's a lot of people who couldn't look the other way, who had to stick around and watch, and they don't like to talk about what they had to do and how many people just died. And history doesn't talk about it because history is written by the
victors. Yeah, look, it's gonna come out, man. It will come out. Also, the British indiscriminate, pretty much genocidal bombing campaigns during World War II. People don't talk about that. That's serious
shit. Realize that was really the first time that they took the gloves, like, because up until then, you could bomb infrastructure, like it was agreed upon, and like, but you didn't bomb a civilian city. But the fucking Churchill was a fucking rabid maniac.
He was crazy, man. He was a piece of shit warmonger, and it's crazy. And if you say that to like the average British person, because they've been so indoctrinated to have this blind love for him, it's the most shocking thing. But it'll come out, It's the same in every single society. Like I grew up in South Africa. Cecil Rhodes, another piece of shit. He was also renowned as a hero, like for the generation just prior to mine, and even for at very young age. He's still got places named after him. There's still roads named after him. Even you get Rothschild Boulevard in South Africa and shit like that.
Wow.
It's wild, man. But it's like that in every single country. That's why you just kind of have to have a foundational awareness and understanding of the introductory basics of how the elitist class operates, and then you can extract these lessons and apply them to virtually any period in history. Like there's always going to be this demographic that they financing things in the shadows, and then they'll weaponize somebody like Hitler. Like Hitler was the ultimate patsy. That's how I've written about that in my publication. But with the Dawes plan, right? With the Charles Dawes plan, what they did over here is they said, okay, we're going to help you guys with the reparations that you have to pay. And as is true, anytime any government allegedly loans another government funds, the way that it works is those funds now have to get appropriated according to the wishes of the power structure, right? Is the power structure going to be benevolent? Are they going to be good? Are they going to be just? Of course not. So they're going to naturally siphon those funds to specific organizations and corporations. Now, through the Dawes plan, which was subsequently followed by the Owen Young plan, the Dawes and the Young plan, people have got to know about these things in order to understand the rise of Nazism and how they were capable of building up their military. These organizations began to float massive loans. Now, these plans and the organizations involved were Wall Street organizations. One of the leading banks, for example, was National City Bank. National City Bank, the largest shareholders at that time, were the Rockefeller family, and the Stillman family, who the Rockefeller and Stillman family, they married into one another, were also very influential. And we know now, of course, I suppose we can get into it in a moment. I don't want to jump the gun too much, but of course how the Rockefellers had this unprecedented influence in building up Nazi Germany through Standard Oil and the Ethel Corporation and Chase Bank. And so National City Bank started to float these massive loans to companies like IG Farben and to organizations that directly ended up funding Hitler and the Nazis directly, not right. This was
like
so
his
crazy and difficult.
Literally his campaign.
Yes, and so through these plans that were cooked up, cooked up by the Wall Street demographic, and also a guy that became Hitler's banker, they sometimes call him the devil's banker, Halsema Schacht. They came up with this idea collectively upon them, amongst themselves. Even the Bank of International Settlements, it was set up allegedly to repay the reparations that were owed to Germany and help facilitate this. Halsema Schacht, again, he played a massive role in this, Hitler's so-called banker. And we know now, for people that have dug into it, the Bank of International Settlements is considered the central bank of central banks. It's a major power structure. Wow. And so that's so interesting to know, because they come up with this Dawes plan the same year that Hitler gives a speech that gives him international notoriety. To me, that's quite interesting, because he was relatively obscure, not anybody significant. He gives a speech, being a powerful orator, and he took some people consider this to be one of, if not the most important speeches of his career. And so he does this, it gives him international recognition, and then this plan is hatched up, and this plan ends up benefiting and offering support to the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany. And this is, of course, as you know, just the beginning.
Yeah. And what people don't realize, I think, is that the same people who created a completely devastating and crushing debt for Germany after World War I are the same people that were essentially the same people that were lining up and figuring out ways to be the ones who lend them the money to put into their war machine, to put into their economy, because Germany had and has always had an incredible infrastructure, present for economic growth, and what's mind-blowing is people have not figured out yet that it's these same parties, you know what I mean? Like, literally, especially World War II, you had it's just incredible to me that the same people saying you owe this are turning around and saying, here, you could borrow it from us, lucky you, like, oh, well, thanks. What the fuck else are we going to do? It's just fucking crazy, man. It's just a twist.
It is. It's very, very wild. But the thing is, as we become more aligned with the objective reality, so like the verifiable reality, where does the paper trail lead, what can be fact-checked and so on, then we start to learn, and it makes a lot more sense than kind of the bullshit story we've been told. Because anybody that, first of all, the official narrative we get told is inculcated with trauma. So like you're a kid and you've already got to watch these kind of shocking videos about the Holocaust, and this is how it happened, and Hitler was just straight up evil, he was irrational. None of it really makes sense. Okay, he was just evil and irrational, and so why did all the German people follow him? And
why did they love him so much?
It's just, it doesn't make, it's very confusing, all of it. But that's how it is. You need to accept it, and boom, done. Instead, what we have to do, and it irritates me, man, because on both sides, this is a podcast I did with Joel and Erasmus recently, is kind of the neo-Nazi worldview that's emerging now. Like, right, there's an underground, people don't want to talk about it. People message me privately because they know about the work I've done on Zionism, and they say, man, the greatest story never told, or what's the other one that's really Europa, the very long one, which I've meticulously watched both of them, right? And we've spoken about it, man. There's deception in there, but there's also powerful truths. Now, the fundamental issue that I have in all of this, what I'm trying to get at, is on the one side, you got this neo-Nazi ideology that's emerging, and they present now Hitler and the Germans, man, they were really the good guys, and they were just angels. Right. And then on the other side, where you've got people that propound that he was just the evilest of evils, and the Holocaust took place like this. Both sides are not actually providing an objective representation of the actual facts. And the issue with this is it's just not geared towards the truth. There's people out there who just want to know, like, what's the truth? And the reason, apart from just our inborn desire to know the truth, is we need to ascertain specifically what took place so that we can mentally defend ourselves in the future. But the reason why we aren't told is because if we learn about these deeper kind of esoteric methodologies that were employed and the duplicity involved, we'll start to see through the system on a much grander scale. Because, yes, Hitler is gone. I know some people say maybe in South America, blah, blah, blah. But let's just say Hitler is gone. Nazism never disappeared. That ideology, it never went away. Eugenics, it never went away. Deception never went away. Elitism never went away. And this, to me, is also tied very closely to what's going on with Zionist Israel, because you get two camps of thought. Again, with that, it's very polarized. So the one, they're very much aware of the Holocaust and these horrible atrocities that took place, and they associate that with Zionism, and so that gives Zionism a full pass, a green card, to do whatever they want because they've morally infallible, they're God's chosen people, and look how they were persecuted. They could never do something so evil. Then on the other hand, we have people that they associate Zionism, who are informed about what is going on in Israel, and they know about Zionism, that it's this really profoundly evil thing, and therefore what took place with the Holocaust, it is just completely nonsense and bullshit, and there was no Jewish persecution. Both of those things are far more complex, and they're not aligned with the actual reality. The truth is, just as you have within the Nazi ranks, you had this variation, this diversity of personality and motives and so on, so too with Zionism. You get people within Zionism that have far more in common, the Zionist leadership with the Nazi leadership, which is why they even work together, than with the common people, so-called down below.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And one truly, I think, has led to the other. I mean, the master race, chosen people, I don't see how the philosophy is different. But
no, it's not different. It's not different at all. And I'm going to tell you something that people are going to say is very controversial, but I don't give a shit. I think that Zionism is far more dangerous than Nazism. Why? Because where the Nazis predominantly could only get Germans or Nordic people to believe in kind of the supremacy of the Nordic race, the Zionists, they've got Christian, the largest demographic in terms of some kind of a tribe on the planet to believe that they are the chosen people, that they are the master race kind of
and
a
they
thing.
did it.
That's scary, brother. And that is a big problem. And right now, if there's going to be a third world war that breaks out, Israel will have its name all over that shit. All over that shit, okay?
You're telling me?
Yeah, all over that shit. And unfortunately, they have the largest... look, there's people that are disillusioned, right? I don't want to pick on Christians and say that, this is just your fault, because I know many Christians that see totally through that shit, right? But I suppose even I'm projecting, because for myself, I used to, and it's so weird to even say this, but I was initially, I wasn't involved in politics, so I didn't even know what Zionism was, but I was actually a Christian Zionist in my own regard, because I thought, chosen people, and they're just defending themselves against hostile, evil Arab neighbors, and man.
Of course.
So in that way, to me, it's
it,
far more dangerous, man. It's, to me, in that regard, it's far more dangerous. And then if people also know about like the prophecy of the so-called prophecy, okay, of the so-called third temple being built, and how that will usher in the coming of Jesus. You know what kind of a false flag that can implicate the world into? That's a dangerous government, my dude. That is a dangerous
Cooper was
government.
just saying this. He said, listen, and this was in 1989. He said, there are people on this planet who are determined to bring revelations to life.
100%, man.
And they're doing what they're doing in order to manipulate people who believe in these things, because then it seems like, oh, look, God is right. There's nothing we can do. We just got to go along with it, and people don't understand that the Bible has been manipulated. I mean, in every way, really, but specifically in recent centuries by these Zionist thinkers, who knew that alone they weren't going to be able to do it. But if they had the support of the Christians, which they sadly...
That's how it's been from day one, man. With the founding of Israel.
And they don't care, they think that Christians believe that all the Jews are going to hell anyway, so they fucking hate us. And most Christians think Jews probably going to go to hell anyway, but since they were God's chosen people, we should support them. So they have this weird love-hate dichotomy.
It's delusional shit, man.
It's so
this
fucking
is just
delusional.
Once again that we don't have a foundation in objective truth. There's a lot of heavy lifting to still be done, but
there is. What can we finish with about Russia? How can we put a cap on the Bolshevik Revolution? What ended up being the main result of it?
Look, I think the main results that came about from that is it gave rise to a kind of new ideological movement, at least in terms of popularity. And as a result of that, again, everything's connected, right? You get an action and then you get a reaction. As a result of that, it also gave rise to Nazism. The two were actually very closely connected. And again, people just need to read Adolf Hitler's writing, Mein Kampf. It's not going to hypnotize you or something. You just have to use some critical thinking. Yeah. And you take...
I don't want to like Hitler. I'm not going to read his book. Fucking, don't you have the ability to discern,
well, for me, it's very simple, man. Like, I want to read everything, and I want to know as much as I possibly can.
Yeah.
If anything, to defend myself psychologically, because if you are unaware of the playbook of the enemy, guess what? They're gonna get the upper hand. It's not rocket science. And so, anyways, with communism, this directly ends up giving rise. And of course, this now gets transplanted and transported to different countries, right? Communist, this element started then to infiltrate within the US. And it's very important for people to understand within the education curriculum. Like today, you got people, Trump supporters and so on. They're like, it's Barack Obama and created this woke culture was the liberals in recent history. This shit has been going on for over 100 years, guys. You're just becoming aware of it now.
Yeah.
Like the Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, and that network, and the Ford Foundation, they were sponsoring education curriculum that was geared towards inculcating communist ideas within the public's mind. And again, I don't want to get too hung up on these terms, because you say communism to 1,000 people and it means 1,000 different things to different people. So, but in this particular regard, what I'm talking about is kind of shame and doubt in your own individual culture. And this is not to say that you shouldn't question some of the horrible shit that happened in U.S. history. Every single citizenry on this planet, I don't care where you are, you need to question the history that you have been told, because the elitist power structure, this rapacious demographic, it's always dodgy, it's always corrupt. But is that a reflection of you? No, you can reflect on the struggles of your ancestors and of your culture and how they resisted against that, which the overwhelming majority of us have, irrespective of skin color. But yes, the significance of communism is it gave rise, I would say, to, again, it's not a new ideology, but that version. And it became a very popular. And that which gets made popular by the people who have the capability to make things popular. It's for a very specific reason. And then it resulted in Nazism. And eventually, with the patronage of Nazi Germany and the culmination and the ending of the Second World War, this gave emergence to, and of course, fascist Italy was also directly implicated in this, very close in their ethos and their outlook. And
the Soviet Russia,
And then Soviet Russia, who was, again, built up incredibly powerfully by the Wall Street interests, specifically the Rockefellers. The first foreign bank in Russia on Karl Marx Avenue was Chase National Bank, in which David Rockefeller was the chair. He was in charge of the organization for almost 20 years. And so the significance is, of course, at the end of World War II, just for the listeners very quickly, they may be saying, well, I just don't get it. Why would they put up Hitler? What's the motive? What's the end game? At the end of World War II, the instrumental influence, which was the Council on Foreign Relations, right? They were in charge of advising the U.S. government on policy through the War and Peace Studies Group, which was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation. What happened in the wake of World War II, they also now advise them on post-World War policy. Now that we have peace, here's the new policy. We need the World Health Organization. We need the United Nations. We need the World Bank. We need the International Monetary Fund. We need, eventually they also come up with a plan for NATO, the largest military alliance in human history. And then we also need the National Security Act of 1947. Remember, World War II ended in 1945, and they're hashing out the details. National Security Act of 1947, also hashed out by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. What did this do? Well, in the U.S., it created the Department of Defense. It took all the military, it centralized it. It basically took what was somebody had a little bit of athleticism and gave them steroids to become this military giant that is the U.S. government today. It created the National Security Agency and Security Council, and it created the infamous Central Intelligence Agency. And so this gave rise to what now is several hundred military bases in foreign countries all around the world. That's a global empire. And then with the NATO, that's a global empire. So the significance is from the granddaddy chessboard move, right? Like the United Nations, which a lot of people don't realize it, but that's kind of the parents of the organization. So the World Health Organization, all of them fall under the umbrella of the UN. That was also donated by the Rockefeller family. They gave like $7 million for the land. They said, you're going to put it over here. This is our gift to you. John D. Rockefeller III, on behalf of his father, John D. Rockefeller Jr., he went ahead and donated that. And of course, they were instrumental and pivotal in the creation of it. And today we see, specifically with the scamdemic, what the implications of this organization is. They can literally declare a worldwide scamdemic. And they can now fast track it. So the significance is, man, it's just part of the playbook. This is how they roll. This is the game they play. This is the chess moves that they are making. And we have to become disillusioned, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, brother. Perfect timing. Listen, I think we have to get into World War II next. But listen, thank you so much for your time, Gavin. I appreciate the education, brother. The words of wisdom, the insights. It's priceless to me, and I love having you on, bro. And I've learned a lot about the Bolshevik Revolution. Even though we took a few meandering turns there, we had to.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interconnected, man, that it's daunting and challenging and overwhelming for anybody. I mean, me and you, we're just regular dudes that like to seek out knowledge and communicate it, and we feel moral duty. But naturally, it's impossible to just cogently, especially when you're doing it in real time, to explain things. So, yeah, we're going to have a couple detours here and there. And I think people appreciate it too, man, because what truth encompasses is so massive that it's a little bit all over the place.
It is. And oftentimes there's no simple and easy answers. It's usually very nuanced to try to encapsulate.
That's right.
But
that's right, man. Yeah.
So I'll get a hold of you. We'll figure out which way we want to go next, but we're going to have to, I think, have a podcast about World War II and about what happened in World War II and bring up kind of.
Yeah, look, we just have to be honest about our presentation in it, which is like, even what we know, we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And it's a topic that is entrenched in confusion and confusion specifically because the way it's been told to us is very deceptive. And so collectively, and there will be listeners that are like, I want to dig into this. So collectively, we kind of have a responsibility, especially not just for now, but even the next generation, to help us become disillusioned, like what really happened here.
Now more than ever, I think more of what is the objective truth, whatever it may be, needs to come to the surface. And I think it would help a lot of people understand exactly how we got to this mess.
100%, man.
If and when it does, And
100%.
more people are open and listening
They are
and
open,
considering and understanding the profundity of what happened in both World War I and World War II than ever. I do notice that it is permeating the consciousness
100%,
of a lot of people who are watching what's going on, scratching their heads, and not quite understanding how these people are doing this to other people, and what's going on. It's like, but when you start to learn the history, it makes a lot more sense. So I'm excited to get into that, bro. But I'll get a hold of you.
Man.
Go have fun with your boy. Have a great day. I know it's day there. It's late here, but it's early there.
Yeah, 100%. I appreciate you having me on, brother. And I suppose just very quickly, because it popped in my head and it's so significant to mention. Just when you're saying the significance of the rise of communism in relation to modern events, we need to understand that woke ideology is the modern expression of that, which is a far left movement. And again, you have to be mindfully aware of cause and effect. Now, there's a reaction to that, and that's emerging, which, for example, you've got this entire movement now. It's intensely nationalist, and immigrants are the problem, and we need to lock people up that are burning a flag. And it's not going to be to the extreme, I have no doubt. Well, I don't want to say I have no doubt of what happened with Hitler and Nazi Germany, but it allows people to lower their moral compass, because anything's better than that extreme left shit.
Right.
So it's important to understand history. And I'm sure we'll get to that in podcasts to come.
Yeah, we will. We will. Listen, for everyone, follow Gavin. He has an awesome Patreon page. He does fantastic work. Definitely support him in every way you can. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe. Leave us a review. Check out my Patreon page, which just launched.
You got a Patreon page? Good stuff, cousin.
Now I do, yeah. And
you got to, brother. You got to monetize this stuff, man.
Absolutely.
You have to.
What we talk about in this next podcast may just have to live on Patreon, depending on where we go with it.
It may indeed. Yeah. But that's the way forward. We need to get support, just like independent, local, organic farmers get support. Otherwise, guess what? There's a corporate takeover. So if you value knowledge, if you value truth, if you value people's earnest efforts to explore complex and difficult topics, but in a healthy and objective way that is rooted in morality rather than selfish bullshit, yes, please. We would appreciate your support.
Gavin, tell everyone the name of your Patreon page and where else they can find you if they want.
They can just find me under my name. It's Gavin Nascimento. So I'm going to let you go ahead and just glance at whatever you're listening to this on, because I know it's a tricky last name. But yes, you can find me on there. Then I'm on the more conventional social media platforms. Things have been crazy. I'm living off grid. There's been incessant typhoons. My window blew out. It's still out there. I've actually got a blanket covering it right now, so I could do the podcast. But I also intend to ramp things up, man. Like it's just time to rock and roll and get shit going. But for now, yes, please check out my Patreon. It's the best place to find me and new content and also exclusive content.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate your time so much, and we'll talk
Likewise,
soon.
brother.
Have fun with your boy. Before you go, let your browser finish uploading the podcast, and then we'll be golden.
Okay, 100%, man. All right, I appreciate
brother.
you, my friend. You get yourself some good night's sleep, and
Thank
then
you,
we'll
brother.
be in touch.
Awesome, brother. We'll do
All right,
it.
my
Talk to you
dude.
soon.
Okay,
Thank you.
cool, cousin. Peace.